One early spring afternoon, 8-year-old Rema Traxler left St. Helens Elementary School to walk home in the quiet logging town of Longview, Washington. The 10-block journey was one she made every day, a path she knew by heart. Her mother, Donnell Kinney, waited for her, expecting to see her daughter burst through the door with her usual youthful energy. But that day, Rema never came home. By 3:30, when she still hadn't arrived, Donnell grew uneasy. Rema was always on time, never late. Desperate for answers, Donnell retraced Rema's route to the school, scanning the streets, playgrounds, and familiar spots where her daughter might have lingered. But there was no sign of her. Panic set in, and by 4:30, Donnell called 911 to report Rema missing. The town sprang into action with police officers, neighbors, and volunteers searching tirelessly for the little girl. As hours passed and the streets grew dark, the grim possibility began to settle in. This was no case of a lost child. Someone had taken her. Donnell recalled a safety precaution she had taught Rema, a secret password, unicorn, to ensure she wouldn't go with anyone who didn't know it. Only Donnell and her estranged husband, Rusty Traxler, were aware of the password. Rusty, Rema's stepfather, became the immediate focus of the investigation. Their contentious relationship, marked by custody battles and disputes, made him a likely suspect. When questioned, Rusty's answers were evasive, and his behavior aroused suspicion. He failed 2 polygraph tests, heightening investigators' concerns. Yet, no evidence directly linked him to Rema's disappearance. The case began to falter, leaving Donnell and the community in a state of heartbreak and uncertainty. Weeks passed with no leads, and the case grew cold, leaving behind only questions and sorrow. Months later, another tragedy unfolded just miles away. Late in November, in Kelso, Washington, Janet LaPrey waited for her 12-year-old daughter, Cara Rudd, to return from school. As the bus arrived and children dispersed, Cara was nowhere to be seen. At first, Janet thought Cara might have missed the bus or gone home with a friend, but as the minutes turned to hours, fear gripped her heart. She called Cara's cousin, who had been at school with her that day. What she learned shattered her. Cara's cousin revealed that a family friend, Joseph Condro, had picked Cara up that morning. Janet's mind raced. Condro had once lived in her garage, but their relationship had soured after disagreement, and she had asked him to leave. She never imagined he might harm her daughter. Cara's cousin recounted how Condro had approached them in the school parking lot, driving his 1982 Firebird. Cara willingly got into his car, telling her cousin she planned to skip school and spend the day with him. Hours later, when Cara failed to return, the case escalated from a simple case of truancy to a suspected abduction. Officer Chuck Davis brought Condro in for questioning. Condro admitted to seeing Cara that morning but insisted he had dropped her off and hadn't seen her again. Davis noticed scratches on Condro's arms and asked him about them. Condro claimed he had locked himself out of his house and scratched his arms climbing through a window. Davis was skeptical, but without concrete evidence, he had no choice but to release Condro. Detectives Jim Dusha and Steve Reham took over the investigation, piecing together Condro's movements on the day Cara disappeared. Witnesses and leads pointed to Mount Solo, a remote area Condro was known to frequent. A search team of 50 people combed the rugged terrain of Mount Solo. After hours of searching, Reserve Lieutenant Mike Parker discovered an abandoned Volkswagen car body. Inside, he found Cara's bra, and beneath the vehicle, her partially decomposed body. Her torso showed significant decay, but the lower half of her body, preserved by the cold and water runoff, provided vital evidence. Forensic pathologist Larry Lumen conducted an autopsy, finding traces of seminal material on swabs taken from Cara's remains. DNA analysis confirmed a match to Joseph Condro. Confronted with the evidence, Condro confessed not only to Cara's murder but also to the long unsolved case of Rema Traxler's disappearance. Condro admitted he had used the password unicorn, shared with him by Rema's stepfather to gain her trust. He lured her to a secluded spot under the guise of taking her swimming and meeting her parents. There, he hit her, strangled her, and crushed her skull with a rock. Rema's body was hidden behind a log, left to decay in the woods. When questioned about his motives, Condro's response was chilling. He likened himself to an alligator, describing how he could lay in wait for years before the urge to kill would surface again. Condro's confession brought closure to 2 grieving families and a community haunted by his crimes. To avoid the death penalty, he agreed to cooperate with authorities and was sentenced to 51 years in prison. His words and actions ensured he would never be released into society. The cases of Rema Traxler and Cara Rudd left an indelible mark on Longview and Kelso, reminding everyone of the darkness that can hide behind familiar faces. It was through the relentless efforts of law enforcement, forensic science, and the resilience of those seeking justice that the truth was finally uncovered. The weight of Condro's confession hit the town like a thunderclap. For years, Rema Traxler's disappearance had haunted Longview, a wound that never healed, a question that no one could answer. Condro's admission brought clarity, but it also brought an unbearable horror. He described the events with a detached, almost mechanical precision, devoid of remorse or empathy. His account painted a picture so dark that even seasoned detectives struggled to process what they were hearing. Condro revealed how he had planned Rema's murder with disturbing forethought. He had known about the password for months, gleaned it casually during a conversation with Rusty Traxler. The knowledge of this breach of trust devastated Rema's mother, Danelle. Rusty, already estranged, became a pariah in her eyes, a man who had, however, unintentionally handed over the key to their daughter's life. On the day of Rema's disappearance, Condro had waited for her outside St. Helens Elementary. He didn't need force. The password unicorn was all it took. Rema, trusting and innocent, climbed into his car, believing she was safe. He drove her to Germany Creek, a remote area he had scoped out in advance. He told her they were going swimming and that her parents would meet them there. It was a lie, but Rema, too young to question the story, went along. Condro later admitted that the entire setup was designed to make his task easier. By convincing her to undress willingly, he wouldn't have to struggle with her clothing later. The details of what followed were too gruesome for even hardened investigators. Condro recounted how he struck Rema on the side of the head, knocking her unconscious. He strangled her, then used a rock to crush her skull. The callousness of his actions, combined with the premeditation, painted him as a predator of the worst kind. Condro hid her body behind a log, confident that the dense forest and time would conceal his crime. What haunted investigators most wasn't just the act itself, but Condro's chilling self-awareness. When asked why he committed these heinous acts, his explanation was as bizarre as it was terrifying. He compared himself to an alligator, explaining how he could lie dormant for years, digesting his urges, only to resurface when the hunger to kill returned. It was not a crime of passion or impulse. For Condro, it was a need, something he saw as an intrinsic part of himself. With Rema's case finally resolved, detectives turned their focus back to Cara Rudd. Unlike Rema, Cara's case had unfolded rapidly, with a tight timeline and more tangible evidence. Yet the brutality was no less horrifying. Cara had trusted Condro too. He had been a family friend, someone her mother had once welcomed into their home. To Cara, he was a familiar face, a source of comfort. She had no reason to fear him. Condro's plan for Cara mirrored what he had done to Rema. He used his charm and familiarity to lure her into his car, promising a day of fun away from school. The evidence suggested that Cara had willingly followed him to Mount Solo. The discovery of her body, partially decomposed but remarkably preserved in some areas, provided forensic investigators with crucial evidence. The DNA left by the perpetrator on the swabs taken from her remains was irrefutable proof that put Condro at the scene of the crime. This would probably seal the coffin on the argument mounted in his defense. For the Rema and Cara families, revelations were a relief and a torment together. The knowledge that their daughters' fates were no longer a mystery provided some solace, but the sheer brutality of Condro's actions was almost too much to bear. Donnell Kinney, in particular, was racked with guilt. She couldn't shake the thought that the password she had created to protect Rema had instead become the tool of her betrayal. Janet LaPrey struggled with a similar torment, haunted by the fact that she had once trusted Condro enough to let him live in her home. The trial of Joseph Condro was a formality. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his confessions left no room for doubt. To avoid the death penalty, Condro agreed to a plea deal, accepting a sentence of 51 years in prison. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars, but the deal sparked controversy in the community. Many felt that someone capable of such monstrous acts deserved no mercy. Yet the deal brought closure, allowing the families to avoid the prolonged agony of a drawn-out trial. For the detectives who worked the case, the resolution was bittersweet. They had solved two of the most haunting cases in the region's history, but the cost was immense. The details of Condro's crimes lingered in their minds, a constant reminder of the evil they had confronted. Detective Scott McDaniel, who had conducted the final interviews with Condro, described the experience as the most harrowing of his career. Condro's utter lack of remorse, his clinical descriptions of the murders, and his chilling self-comparison to an alligator were things McDaniel would never forget. The cases of Rema Traxler and Cara Rudd left a scar on the communities of Longview and Kelso. Parents became more protective, watching their children with renewed vigilance. Schools implemented stricter security measures. The legacy of Joseph Condro's crimes was one of loss and fear, but it also was a testament to the strength of those fighting for justice. Finally, the detectives who worked steadily to solve this case, the forensic scientists and the prosecutors all worked tirelessly to make sure Rema and Cara would not be forgotten. Condro's name became synonymous with betrayal and evil, but the memories of Rema and Cara lived on in the hearts of their families and communities. They were more than victims. They were daughters, friends, and bright lights extinguished too soon. In their memory, the community found strength, determined to protect its children and ensure that such tragedies would never happen again. The cases of Rema Traxler and Cara Rudd left an indelible mark on the hearts of everyone who followed their tragic stories. They served as a grim reminder of the fragility of innocence and the dangers that can lurk in the shadows of even the most familiar faces. Yet, amidst the devastation, their stories became a rallying cry for change and vigilance. Communities united in grief, but also in resolve, to ensure their children would never suffer the same fate. For the families of Rema and Cara, the road to healing would be long and fraught with heartache. There were no words, no punishments severe enough to fill the void left by their loss. Yet, they chose to honor their daughters by cherishing the joyful memories they left behind, Rema's vibrant energy, Cara's contagious laughter, and by sharing their stories to protect others from the horrors they endured. Joseph Condro's name became a symbol of betrayal and evil, his actions forever etched in the annals of the community's darkest days. He would live out the rest of his life in the cold confines of a prison cell, stripped of his freedom and power. But for all his cruelty, he could not take away the resilience of those he tried to destroy. The justice secured by the detectives, prosecutors, and forensic teams was more than just a verdict. It was a declaration that, even in the face of unspeakable tragedy, truth and perseverance would prevail. In the end, Rema and Cara's legacies were not defined by the horrific acts that claimed their lives, but by the unwavering love and determination of those who fought for them. Their stories became a beacon, a somber yet powerful reminder to cherish and protect what is most precious. Through the darkness, their memories shone brightly, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the unyielding power of justice. It is a bit after 3 in the morning, and the dark, thick fog hovers across Highway 79, so nothing much else is visible other than the thin beam of headlight rays on it. A patrol car meanders its way towards the roadside field. For Patrolman Steve Prelesnik, the call would launch him into one of those true, tragic stories, the one that haunted him to this very day. The loneliness of early morning had wrapped itself around the scene like a smothering blanket. Every shadow stretched unnaturally, the fog turning the familiar landscape into something alien and unsettling. Prelesnik couldn't shake the feeling that he was driving into something far more sinister than a routine accident. In the distance, faint red and blue strobes hinted at a location he would soon wish he had never reached. The quiet weight of the radio's silence filled his car, each static pop making him grip the wheel tighter. This wasn't the kind of call anyone could prepare for. It was the kind that would linger long after the case was closed, a dark memory to revisit him in the quiet hours of the night. The stillness of the highway was ominous, broken only by the hum of the patrol car engine. Prelesnik's knuckles whitened as his grip on the steering wheel tightened, a weight pressed in his chest from that strange, instinctive dread that all officers learn to recognize. Flashing red and blue lights painted the fog in surreal hues as he drew closer to the scene. He stepped out into cold air that bit at his face. His flashlight beamed into the darkness. What he found would etch itself into his memory forever, a scene of chaos and tragedy that even years of experience could not prepare him for. Each step towards the wreck felt like an eternity. The rhythmic crunch of gravel under his boots was deafening in the otherwise still night. It wasn't even recognizable, just twisted shapes of char, speaking of unimaginable forces working their way on it. The beam from his flashlight landed upon Alma's body, lifeless, her delicate features frozen in death so serenely. It was a jolting sight, violence in the car accident, and this stillness. Prelesnik's stomach turned as he crouched down to confirm the inevitable, his breath forming ghostly clouds in the frosty air. Even in her final moments, it seemed as though Alma had fought to survive, her outstretched hand frozen in a silent plea for help. In the dim glow of his flashlight, Patrolman Prelesnik sees what, to him, is what a horrific single-car accident might have produced: overturned, burnt from fire, single car and female driver thrown free from the vehicle. Her lifeless body lay approximately 15 feet from the remains. He searched her body and could not find any vital signs that would give life. Alma Napier is dead. The wind carried the acrid smell, faint, of the fire that had engulfed the car. Nearby, broken glass sparkled like minute stars flung on the ground, an irony against a veil of surrounding darkness. Prelesnik hesitated, laying a quivering finger against her neck, praying to find even the slightest pulse, but the cold, unyielding truth could not be mistaken. He looked away for a moment, and the weight was heavy on his shoulders. From afar, the faint wail of approaching sirens promised aid, but it was too late. Alma was gone. Her story abruptly and incomprehensibly ended on that desolate stretch of road. Prelesnik made a silent pledge that whatever transpired here would not be forgotten. Alma Napier wasn't a name on any police report, but a daughter, sister, and friend of so many in that close-knit community of Nuevo, California. Earlier in the night, Alma had been at the Winchester Inn, a quasi-local roadhouse with a rowdy reputation and late-night pool games. Everyone knew Alma around Nuevo. She was magnetic. Every moment in her presence was a memory. That night at the Winchester Inn, she'd laughed, lining up her next pool shot while her friends cheered. A jukebox crooned somewhere in the background, some unheard soundtrack to their lives, and Alma was its star. The regulars gave her hugs and inside jokes, even strangers resistant to her charms. Still, there are the outward acts of joy to show, depth which just very few knew existed in Alma. While most everything in her outward appearance seemed but a layer or more, she handled her family troubles with quiet fortitude. Witnesses describe Alma shooting pool in the bar, talking to anyone who would listen, and sipping a drink. To all intents and purposes, she was in good spirits. Somewhere, however, in the hours that followed, her life took a dark and tragic turn. Alma's last recorded smile came as she won a game of pool, raising her cue in mock triumph before retiring to the bar for another drink. The man in the corner was a shadow in the room, unseen by most, yet silently following her every move. Alma's kindness had always been her strength, but that night it also made her a target. As the crowd thinned and the lights dimmed, her vibrant energy began to fade into the quiet hum of closing time. None of them could have predicted that the next chapter of her night would go up in flames, silencing her laughter forever. What nobody had caught, or perhaps didn't want to notice, was the fellow sitting alone in a corner, regarding Alma steadily. He nursed his drink as if he had all the time in the world, impassive. Drifters went through the Winchester Inn often enough, but there was something about this man, an edge, a presence that just didn't sit right. Alma's sunny disposition served as an invitation to everyone around her, and that same openness may have just made her a target. His presence was subtle, almost deliberately so. He avoided eye contact with anyone except Alma, his gaze following her with an unsettling intensity. The bartender, wiping down glasses, glanced at him once but thought nothing of it. After all, the Winchester Inn saw its fair share of loners passing through, road workers, truck drivers, and the occasional wanderer looking for a nightcap. But this man was different. He didn't blend in, he stood out, a still quiet predator amidst a room full of oblivious prey. As Alma laughed and chatted on, completely oblivious to the fact that she was under his scrutiny, he leaned forward, his glass of amber liquor untasted, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. Alma's car was found just 10 miles from the Winchester Inn, overturned and charred. The initial investigation wrote her death off as an all-too-common scenario. A single driver, late at night, losing control of her vehicle on a curving road. She had no alcohol in her system according to the autopsy, but that hardly mattered. Same story, tragic accident, case closed. The place where it happened was that desolate stretch of Highway 79, with a sharp curve near a steep embankment. The patrol officers assumed that Alma had misjudged the turn and her vehicle had skidded out of control before rolling and catching fire. It was a conclusion that fitted the facts, or at least the surface facts. But there were subtle details to suggest otherwise, a more sinister story. The skid marks didn't quite fit the patterns one might expect to see when a driver loses control, and the tire treads suggested a sudden swerve rather than a gradual drift. And then there was the fire. Common enough in severe crashes, the intensity of the flames raised questions nobody seemed too eager to answer. The case was closed quickly, but the highway seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for someone to uncover the truth. Her family would not buy the explanation. They knew Alma was a cautious driver, always alert to what was going on around her. Something does not add up, her sister Maria kept telling anyone who would listen. But without evidence of foul play, the case faded into the background, leaving nothing but questions and the gnawing ache of loss. Maria became the reluctant voice of her family, tirelessly pushing for answers that never came. She visited the crash site often, tracing the skid marks with her fingers and whispering Alma's name into the wind. To her, Alma's death was not just a tragedy, but a mystery demanding resolution. Her pleas to law enforcement were met with polite dismissals, their words tinged with frustration. "We've reviewed everything. Nothing else to investigate." But Maria couldn't let it go. She started compiling her own evidence eyewitness accounts, photographs of the crash scene, even interviews with patrons from the bar. Every piece of evidence seemed to confirm her suspicion that Alma had been murdered. But Alma's story was far from over. 16 years later, a parole agent would discover a shocking truth that would rewrite the entire narrative of Alma's death. It began with a routine review of files, the kind of drab task Nagshane had done hundreds, if not thousands, of times in his career. But as he sifted through the details of a parolee's history, Alma's name leapt off the page like a ghost from the past. The case file, long buried in the archives, held fragments of a story that didn't quite fit together. Nagshane was piqued. The more he read, the more the inconsistencies gnawed at him. He wasn't one to ignore a gut feeling, and this case had the hallmarks of something darker, a story waiting to be unearthed. It had been relegated to the cold case file, buried deep in the archives, a forgotten chapter in the annals of tragedy. But to Nagshane, this was anything but a normal case. "Every file tells a story," he often said, "and some stories refuse to be silenced." As he pieced together the fragments of Miller's life, Alma's name resurfaced like a ghost demanding justice. The deeper Nagshane dug, the more the connections became troubling. Parole records for Craig Miller suggested a violent history, restraining orders, police reports, and whispered allegations that never saw the inside of a courtroom. Nagshane learned that Miller had been in Nuevo the night Alma died. Witnesses at the Winchester Inn described a man matching his description lurking in the shadows. With each turned page, the unease mounted. For Nagshane, it wasn't just about Alma getting justice. It was about the potential to take on a system that had allowed her story to fade into obscurity. Her family has placed flowers at the site every year on the anniversary of her death, a quiet remembrance of a life cut too short. Those who knew Alma locally often drive by. Slowing down, it would seem to pay silent homage. Nothing has changed in the highway, but for those that loved Alma, it is the place where the hands of time remain still, pointing out the frailty of life and the resilience of justice. The quiet witness of this memorial is a small wooden cross covered with fresh flowers, but passerby often leave small tokens: candles, handwritten notes, even a photo or two. For the Napier family, these are bittersweet gestures, a realization that Alma's light touched more lives than they could have imagined. Yet the scars of that night remain, etched into the road in their hearts. Maria still visits the site regularly, her hands brushing over the names carved into the cross. "You're not forgotten," she whispers. And somewhere in the stillness of the highway, it feels as though Alma hears her. The story of Alma Napier was a grim reminder of the fragility of life, and that justice, however belated it may come, must always be pursued. She is a reminder to all of us to be vigilant, question the stories that don't feel complete, and advocate for those that can no longer speak for themselves. If you or someone in your life has information about unsolved cases or is seeking justice, don't wait. Reach out to your local authorities or organizations committed to solving cold cases. Let Alma's story inspire change and keep her legacy alive. Justice may be late, but justice is never too late to fight. Share Alma's story and help shine a light on the darkness that still keeps its watch along forgotten highways. Together, we can ensure that no voice, no story, and no life is ever truly forgotten.